Elizabeth, Maxine, thank you so much for joining me. Do we say you're CEO of Bitpesa now, or what's the rebrand?
Well, we just rebranded as a finance. So Bitpesa is still one of our key three products, but the group name is now Asa.
Great. And Maxine from Bitspark?
Still Bitspark.
Still Bitspark. Good. All right. So let's get started. This session is blockchain in payments and remittances. For you guys, you have been doing this now for about 5 years or so. What is the problem in this traditional industry that you are looking to solve?
Sorry, this guy's coming.
So I'll start over. Yeah, what's the problem in this industry that you are trying to solve?
Well, when I first moved to Nairobi, Kenya in 2009, I really struggled to send money abroad or to receive money locally. And I was working across the continent, representing almost 20 countries in what I was doing. I was a rating analyst. And what I kept seeing with local banks was the same issue on a bigger scale. They were lending in dollar or euro, and then they were on lending in local currency. So there was this asset and liability mismatch from the start. And no matter what kind of governance and the UN policy or the Gates Foundation, at the end of the year, there was an FX problem. And what you weren't seeing was enough liquidity in local currencies. And it's very similar to the cryptocurrency space where you see a lot of coins launch and there not be enough liquidity to trade in both directions. So when we came in, we said, how do we become a market maker to make it possible to trade these local African currencies? And when we launched Bitpesa, we were the first one to use Bitcoin to do so. So I always say that our first customer was a Canadian who wanted to put 500 Canadian dollars onto Kenyan shilling. And so he really knew about crypto. In fact, his avatar was a Bitcoin. And so I said, you know what? I don't have a Canadian dollar account. I only have a US and a French account and a Kenyan account. Why don't you send me crypto? I'll accept that. And then I'll pay out in Kenyan shilling. And I knew I could sell the crypto and get out of my position because there was a ton of developers in Nairobi who wanted the Bitcoin. So all of a sudden I realized, wow, this is a middle currency when you can't find that currency pair at your local bank, or whether the currency pair at your local bank is too expensive, slow, or full of friction.
And Maxine, what about you?
Yeah, so at Bitspark, we're all about providing access, and I think that's the main concern here when we're thinking about payments or remittances. When somebody's talking about payments, they tend to think about banks, sending mobile money, this type of thing. But really, there's a second conversation there when it comes to remittances, and remittances, they're more focused on using cash. So there's a real big, I think, misunderstanding of what those two words mean in the industry. And basically, Bitspark wants to be able to make cash payments online and make that incredibly easy by using cryptocurrency. So really, what we're looking to solve is becoming that cash fiat on and off ramp that's currently missing and taking crypto out of that walled garden that you see so that people can use it to send money and receive money in cash.
And Elizabeth, talk to us a little bit about the challenges of navigating Africa and how you have been able to build a business there in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, well, it's been 6 long years. I have a lot of gray hair under this hair dye.
Maybe a long time. Okay.
I mean, it's so interesting to hear about Bitspark's journey because we didn't have those currency pairs. In Southeast Asia, you do have healthy currency pairs with liquidity between them, and you can go to the bank and get them. There might be friction, but it's crazy that in the 55 countries across Africa, you see neighboring countries where you cannot buy and sell your neighbor's currency. And in West Africa, you see often it going through the euro, up into France, and then back down even into a neighboring country. And in Africa, to go from Nigeria to South Africa, which are two mega economies, you still have to traverse through the US dollar. And for those of you, I'm sure you all know, when you move money through the US dollar, it's actually going through a US intermediary. That means US jurisdiction, US law, US speed, and no offense, but they call you in the middle of the night to confirm it. I don't know how many transactions I used to have where I would miss the phone call from the wire lady at 2 a.m. and then, back to square one, we start again. So I think there's a lot of inconvenience with that dollarization, which you don't necessarily see on other continents. And the way we've done it is we've had to build it from scratch. I have a good friend who runs a fast food chain in Kenya, and he says, not only do I have to sell the chicken sandwiches, I have to grow the chickens, grow the wheat, and make the paper factory to wrap it in. So I think you just have to be ready for the journey and know that the pace is slower, but the opportunity is larger.
And Maxine, when we were talking beforehand, you were explaining to me how you have these organic cash points. So you're building the business very organically, literally individuals that are helping you grow. How are you doing that, especially in this part of the world?
Yeah, I think if you're going to have that conversation, you really need the context of what Bitspark's doing, right? So like Elizabeth said, it's all about building that infrastructure. And essentially the infrastructure that Bitspark builds is the ability for people to cash in and cash out their stable coins or their digital balances. Now, there's a couple of layers to this. You need to have a whole global network of cash points. Sometimes they're individuals, sometimes they're businesses. We actually have a restaurant chain in Hong Kong that have adopted being a cash point. And that's one layer. The second layer is having the ability for people to access these cash points through our products, so that's the mobile app and also the web. And then you need a trading platform for them to be able to do this. So you can see that, the last 5 years, that's what Bitspark has been focusing on building out. And previous to that, it was very fragmented, right? Because people were still trying to understand what the capability of was crypto in itself, but also what the market needs. The market at the moment really needs an end-to-end infrastructure, and it doesn't really matter if it's just remittances or payments, but it's just all around.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah.
You mentioned stablecoins. The biggest stablecoin, potentially what could be the biggest stablecoin in the world, is Libra. I'm curious how Libra, if it does come to fruition.
Is Libra the most popular stablecoin if nobody's using it?
It hasn't
Fair
been launched
point.
yet.
Yeah, I know. The thing is, it's like maybe it's popular because everybody has heard of it. It's launched by Facebook. That's undeniable. But if there's nobody buying or selling it, it doesn't. I wouldn't say it's the most popular. The most popular is probably Tether.
By far.
Yeah, by far. And what's really interesting about this is that Tether was the first use case for us to see that, hey, stable coins are necessary. But it's still within that crypto space. It's still only necessary for exchanges, right? And people who are cryptocurrency traders. So what's going to be really fascinating in the space is seeing stable coins being used as a means of transfer for more exotic countries. And when I say that, it's being outside of the China-US currency domination.
And could Libra solve that?
I think that we have to realize that right now we're still at the inception phase. I mean, we still don't even have the members of the consortium set. So I think, this is a social media platform which does a lot of social media things well. I mean, Maxine and I have been in the trenches for the last 6 years. Of course, not with the resources that Facebook has, but this is a complicated, complex thing to even build it sub-regionally, as the two of us have. Think about all the countries in the world that's looking to build it out in, all of the cash points, all of the in and out points, all of the regulation. It's a massive undertaking. Now, can it happen? Maybe. But I think at that point right now, there's going to be a lot of other stablecoins that launch and gain popularity much, much earlier.
And I just think want to kind of add to that is that if you look at the partnerships that Libra has, it's really not partnerships that are meaningful for, targeting the unbanked, like Libra had said they were going to do. It's all about PayPal and digital money. And really, this comes down to the conversation of the difference between settlement and authorization. Libra is thinking very much about authorization that's moving zeros and ones across different databases. And really, if you're talking about remittances, which is like a cash component, it needs to be cash settlement. Like Elizabeth said, you need to have cash points, you have to have liquidity in those different markets. And if they were really intentional about using Libra as the global coin, they would have partnerships with people like Western Union or MoneyGram.
And one of the biggest issues that we face, we work with a lot of customers in the remittance space, and there are customers. We don't have a P2P product like Bitspark. We're a B2B2C product, which means we help these remittance companies solve their problems, solve their FX problem, solve their settlement problem, solve their last mile problem. And the biggest remittance companies in the world have the same problem. They want to get $1 million onto their last mile account. They want to put it on the ATM network. They want to get it to the mobile money in this country. They want to help their provider, but there's just a delay. So, no matter how much innovation you have, if you're using the same 3 global counterparties, you're still stuck with those same 3 global counterparties bottlenecks. So we have to think about a parallel system, and building a parallel system takes time, or it requires everybody participating, and we're not really seeing that yet.
Moving from one big cryptocurrency or potential of one to another, China. And China potentially launching its own digital currency. Why would China want to do this, and what are some of the benefits that they could reap from this, and also potentially pitfalls?
Yeah, I mean, I think that blockchain technology can be a double-edged sword. It provides a lot of transparency and efficiency, and really, at the end of the day, it's technology and it's a tool that somebody can use. So the government can use that to, launch a global cryptocurrency that people use, and it might be very efficient. But it also means that there's less transparency as to whenever you're sending and receiving payments. But really, I think that it's inevitable that governments are going to begin adopting global currencies because it's just the way forward. We live in a digital world. Governments have to catch up.
And I think it just removes, again, these counterparties. If you read the SWIFT report, and I said this on the other stage as well, most transactions, or a good chunk of transactions, over a quarter, going between Africa and China are routed via the USD, even if it has no endpoint in America. This makes zero sense. So I think when we're seeing trade and cooperation across the governments in Asia and Africa and in other continents strengthen and grow, I mean, you see the government of Japan make these big declarations about participation in Africa. We need to have those currency pairs. We need to have the liquidity. We need to have those corridors open. And what a digital currency does is set a new precedent that this is how we're going to trade this currency, and it reroutes things through a different way. Now, will it be fair? Will it be transparent?
Yeah.
Will there be human rights? All these other things.
And also, will it even happen in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, the existing system works for governments. People are still able to send and receive payments using the banking industry. Yes, it's fragmented, but at the same time, I do wonder that it's still in theory rather than in practice. So as much as governments like to say that they're adopting digital assets, as they like to brand it, we haven't seen that being used yet. So I think at that point, I hope that when it is used, we do see the kind of the benefits that come from it.
Well, I don't think it's working for all governments.
No, and it won't, because the thing is, all governments are so unique, right? China is the mothership. It's completely centralized. Whatever the government says there happens, and they're very swift in being able to implement whatever the government chooses to do. But if you look at somewhere like Southeast Asia, trying to get all those governments to work together, using and trading different stable coins that they've released, might be a little bit harder.
Yeah. I think it's just interesting to see that, I was just at this forum over in Dubai with all these supposedly global leaders, and they just kept talking about the UK and Europe.
Yeah.
And I was like, we have to realize you're not the center of the earth anymore, and this is not where population growth is happening or trade, but those are still the major currencies in the global baskets. And I think, what we are seeing from the Chinese experiment, if it is coming out, is a clear statement that we can create another road. And, that's important to know, and it's important to recognize.
I'm curious, Elizabeth, Bitpesa started out as a blockchain company that has now kind of morphed into more of a traditional FX company. Take me through that, how you've gone through that journey.
Well, as I said before, I started the company to solve the problem that there was no liquidity in African currencies. So my problem was African markets were excluded. And I don't mean financial inclusion, like a random farmer, in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like, large companies were excluded from the market. And people in exporting and importing $1 million payments couldn't make it happen. It was truly a barrier for growth for a large part of the small and medium-sized businesses. So that was the goal of the company. And honestly, I wasn't part of the club. I had left investment banking. I was in a rural suburb in Kenya. I've been traveling across the continent, penniless, doing this thankless job. How was I going to start a business? And so I used open software. I connected with a global developer community. I reached out to investors that were looking for something different and unique, that weren't afraid to invest in a woman over 30 with kids, starting an FX business outside of Nairobi, Kenya. And I think that's what really attracts me to this space. It's about creating something new. It's about a paradigm shift. And if we're not afraid to do that, then we're not afraid to think about what if the US dollar or whatever else you want to think. But I think it starts there with, let's just start from scratch. And so I was really excited to use, and I didn't start out as a blockchain. Back then we called it Bitcoin, and I think for me it was the way to get in touch with those communities. So the first trades that I did were in Bitcoin. My first partners here on mainland and also in Hong Kong were Bitcoin companies. We worked with BTC China, we worked with Melodic back in the day, we worked with Genesis in New York, we worked with Kraken and Bitstamp, and they all reached out to me, treated me as equals, and as a counterparty, I held the same trust. And that's so important. I didn't have to build a gigantic marble building in Paradeplatz in Zurich, Switzerland for them to trade with me. And that's lets other people into the game. And once you start to lower the barrier to entry and you welcome people in, you get to see all sorts of innovative solutions. And maybe the best solution is coming from somewhere where you didn't expect. And I think when we have things so guarded around the same 10 incumbents, and this is a parallel to the fintech sector, we start to lose track of what is innovation. All R&D can't come in the same 5 banks' R&D department. Most of it will come from places you least expect.
And Maxine, we were talking about China and how China is becoming a cashless society. But you made an interesting point to me. You said that actually the world still very much depends on cash, and the world is not. This is not a cashless world by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I think the thing is people like to kind of be in their own echo chamber and be like, oh, the world's going cashless. But really, if you're looking at the largest emerging economies out there, predominantly they're still using cash. So cash is a huge conversation when you're trying to think about creating an alternative financial system. And I think that you totally have it right, Elizabeth. It's about it's about providing an alternative that's end-to-end that works. A lot of the time, a lot of fintech solutions out there are just solving, a small piece of what's happening.
One part of the vertical.
Yeah, exactly. And really, I think what the industry is looking at and trying to achieve is being like, okay, well, we know there are people out there that want to have opportunities, right? So how to provide that infrastructure that they can access what cryptocurrency or what you guys are doing at the moment can provide.
And we have about 2 minutes left, so I want to end on a story that you each can tell me. How did you get into Bitcoin? When did it all start for each of you?
Well, 2013, October, so literally 6 years ago today, I was working in microfinance. I had worked with mobile money. I was already thinking about, what is the next step? And I met a guy who gave me Bitcoin at lunch. And he was like really passionate about going to...
How much did he give you?
A lot, actually, now. And he was passionate about going to Somalia, which is, neighboring country to Kenya and a broken state, and saying, let's use Bitcoin to replace the currency there. And I said, well, we still need an on and off ramp, just what Maxine said. So, and then I realized I went to the iHub in Nairobi, Kenya, and a lot of the developers were taking Bitcoin as payment for salary for doing work abroad. And that's how I got into it.
Yeah, my story, I think there was 2 defining moments for me. The first one was learning about what Bitcoin was in the first place, and that was down to my co-founder, George Harrop, who's the CEO of Bitspark as well. And I just remember, I was in my degree of international relations, and I felt so disillusioned by what that world was going to provide me. And when I heard about Bitcoin, I was like, okay, this is it. So I actually quit my degree and I didn't return. I was 6 months of graduating and I was like, no, crypto life is for me. So that was the first defining moment. The second defining moment was the first time we ever sent a cash in, cash out transfer using Bitcoin in 2014. Our customer was able to save an extra space at her wedding from the cost savings that we were able to provide for her. So I think it was right there in that moment that I was really happy that I left my degree and I pursued this career.
Elizabeth, Maxine, thank you so very much.
Thanks so much.
Many thanks indeed, especially to you, Steve Rossiello. Thank you very much for leading that conversation.